Let's all welcome Miles.
Sadler, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. It really is. It's so lovely to have so many nations represented here. I hope you're enjoying your time in London. I really do. And it's lovely to have an opportunity to talk to you this morning. Sadler gave a very good, now. I think this isn't actually, hold on, there may be a little switch. Let's try that. Right. No, that's made no difference whatsoever. Right. Oh, right, okay, right, yep. Right, get it to pay attention to me. Right. There we go. So Sadler has given me a very kind introduction. I thought rather than somebody saying who Miles Berry was, I would get the machine to say who Miles Berry is and what he apparently knows about AI in education. It's done a reasonably good job of this. It's not hallucinated. Nothing on the screen behind me, to the side of me, I should say, is untrue. But it misses out really important detail that Sadler did cover. So I spent my first 18 years of my career working across 4 different schools, much of that time as an IT coordinator. I did 3 years as a head teacher, which was quite enough. Thank you very much. That was hard work. It really was. My role now is training the next generation of outstanding teachers at the University of Roehampton, which is southwest London. And Roehampton are kind and let me out to do other interesting things too, such as talking to you all this morning. I was part of the panel who put together England's computing curriculum. So I have a lot of interest in AI education. So teaching pupils about how AI works, about how machine learning works, which was the talk I gave like 5 years ago, 6 years ago now. So is requesting meeting questions. I'm going to see what happens if I click enable there. Who knows? Right, okay, wave to me, please, to get my attention on this screen. But a lot of the talks I'm giving recently have been much more about AI in education. Talk about multitasking. Okay, I'm going to minimize this. Somebody else might like to pass on to me the questions if we get those on the call. Right, you don't want more of this introduction. Let me, okay, now I switch it back on and move to the next slide. We'll see what happens. So when we designed England's computing curriculum, we said there were 3 elements to this: computer science and information technology and digital literacy. It's better to think of these as the foundations, the applications, and the implications of this. And that model works really well for thinking about AI in education, that there should be some understanding of how this technology actually works. It's not just a black box. It's not magic that is happening, often as it may seem like that. And there's a whole middle thing there about how to use it well. I think to save time, but it appears that the jury is out on that. And then we also need to think through the implications of this. And some of that is around school policy and what that actually means in terms of implementation. But there are also bigger implications, like what sort of future are our pupils going to be prepared for? That's roughly the structure for the next 75 minutes or so. So I want to do a little bit at the start about how the magic works. Main bit here is about how we can use this well, and I fear there may be some overlap with yesterday's sessions from what I was hearing at the start of the day. And then I'll round off before we get our coffee break with what this actually means for schools, for society, for teachers, and for individual kids. So that's the plan. Okay, next slide, please. Here we go. So on then to the foundations of this. Once upon a time, we taught kids that computers were machines. They accepted input, they process that according to a stored program, and that produces output. We are still teaching this to 14, 15, 16-year-olds in England. It isn't like this anymore, not for the big things at any rate. So what we have now is a model which is much closer to what the one on the slide there, that yes, there is input, and that is linked to output, but no longer by hard-coded programs. That's determined by some machine learning model. How is the model established? We train it. Rather than telling it what to do, we give it lots and lots of examples of how input relates to output. And then we select a particular machine learning algorithm to help the machine develop a model based on those connections. So people are still involved. This is not all done automatically by the machines. We choose the training data, we choose the machine learning algorithm, and then we let it go and figure out for itself how to connect other inputs to what the output should be, okay? And we need to teach children about this. And I think you need to understand that if you didn't already. Unless you get to this position, but where for anything but the most specialized applications, we are not going to write programs anymore. We are going to train it how to do these things. So we show it, we teach it, rather than program it, unless it's a particular sort of niche thing. I'll give you a moment to copy down the details from the slide there. Okay. What you have is a very, very simple small language model built into your phone. You will have noticed it knows what word you're very likely to type next. And you can do this on card with kids. You can do the conditional probability calculations. You give them 10 cards with 10 text messages on, all of which begin with, I'll call you, and say, okay, looking at these 10 example messages, which word comes next most often? And in the example here, it's I'll call you when, which coincidentally is what my iPhone puts right in the middle for me to just stab with my finger there. I see some of you using iPads here. If any of you are working in iPad-based schools, you will have seen children writing stories on iPads by just picking one of the words. They're not typing their story. They're getting the computer to give them choices at each word, and they choose one of those 3 words. Whose work is this? Now, is that their creativity? Is that the model? So you are, I hope, all familiar with predictive text. When you think of a large language model, just think of it as really, really good predictive text. It is playing games with words. I can make this a larger language model. I can do other things too. So here, I have given it 3 Jane Austen novels to read for me. And all it is doing is looking at the way Jane Austen uses words in those novels. The example on screen is, if she puts down the words I am, what word does she typically put next? And according to my computer here, she puts the word sure down 29% of the time. Jane Austen writes, I am sure, lots in her novels, it seems. She puts I am not, I am very, I am afraid comes up quite a lot. And we can just do that. This is code which kids can write themselves. I would say by the age of 16, it will vary from one country to another, but this is accessible for kids in secondary school. Now, once we can do that, we can look at the first 2 words and choose the 3rd word randomly according to these probabilities. If I've got the 2nd and 3rd word, I can pick the 4th word according to the probabilities. If I've got the 3rd and the 4th word, I can pick the 5th word according to the probabilities. I'm not going to go on, 3 examples was enough. And I can keep doing that to randomly generate text based on Jane Austen's use of language. And that's what you have on the next slide. The code to do that fits comfortably in the top, I don't know, 3/4 of your monitor there. It doesn't need anything more sophisticated than that program to write this. Not Jane Austen, because it is a bit rubbish, yeah? This is not good writing. She writes the 3rd example. I am a little hesitation, and no need to find a spare half hour. And so completely made up my mind immediately that she had to. It's not Jane Austen. It's not even Bridgerton. This is just fiction. It's not good language, but it follows the pattern of Austen's words. And this is closer to what ChatGPT and the other language models do. Before they released ChatGPT, there are extra chairs over there if you'd like to make yourself comfortable. I was sat somewhere over there, so there's at least one spare. Okay, you're very welcome. No, lovely to have you here. It really is. So before they released ChatGPT 2 years ago, there was the GPT Playground, which showed you a little of what was happening behind the screen. So this was a completer. It would carry on your writing for you, much like the kid with the iPad choosing one of 3 words. Here are 5 ways in which AI can be used to provide access to the curriculum. He starts. And then 2nd bullet point, it puts down the number 2. That was a very likely thing to start the 2nd bullet point with. Shock horror. picks the next word, machine learning. Machine learning algorithms can be used to, and we get to analyze there, which is the one I've highlighted. And it tells me, based on all of the things it had read, the language model itself, and all of the words it has used so far, what the chance of each word coming down next was. So identify as 26% probability of that being the word that should come next. Analyze was 19% chance. It rolls its dice and chooses the second word from the list, and so puts down the token analyze. And we can carry on and see what it's written there. So the red stuff is where it had to sort of make a guess rather than it being obvious. There are two consequences to this. One, you get a different response every time because it's a random stochastic process that it's going through. Two, if it puts the wrong word down, it's got to live with this. There are people in the room who will have said to children, bad choices have consequences, yeah? This is what's going on here, yeah? If it chooses the wrong word, all of the words that come afterwards have to take into account that word, that token. So hallucination is built into the thing. You never see it going back and changing its mind. We as people are pretty good at changing our minds when we know we've got something wrong. We edit our work. Okay, the latest versions are better at this, but even so. Okay, onwards. I think you'll find it's a little bit more complicated than that. So when it thinks about a word, it thinks about the word quite differently to how we do. You have this notion of language embedding, that words are determined by their relationship to other words. On my 2D screen, I can show you 3 dimensions of this. And my 3 dimensions are about the concept of royalty, and the concept of gender, and the concept of age. And then we have the words man, man and king are related in some way as a vector in this 3D space. That vector is parallel to the one that relates woman to queen. Yeah, and some of your schools will do this. You make children answer questions like, man is to king as woman is to blank. And if they get that right, you give them a place at the school. This is verbal reasoning test, yeah? This applies in all languages, or pretty much every language. If the word is determined by its relationship to other words. So if I was to do this in your nation's own language, the vectors would be the same. The word would be in the same space. It would be a different word. Of course, the label would be different, but its relationship to other words and the analogy vectors would be the same, irrespective of language for almost all languages. I'm sure you could think of a counterexample, but we're not going to do that now. And this is how Google Translate and other machine translation works. Not by just looking at the statistical patterns anymore of this phrase is always translated as that phrase, but where we go down to the basement underneath the skyscrapers of language and think of how that word is, or that phrase is represented in a much more complex multidimensional space. So it's good at languages as well as a particular language. So as I say, it is a little bit more complicated than just predictive text. Sorry, doing too many things at the same time on somebody else's computer. Here we go. Right. What was it trained on? Is there anybody in the room who has posted things onto Reddit? Excellent. Okay, did you post links into Reddit? Do you remember? Good. So you helped train GPT-3. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, this is really appreciated. So web text 2 on the table there are the pages that people linked to from Reddit. You can scrape that, you can find all of that content, you can read those pages. So web text 2 is 22% of the training mix. That content played a very big part in the language that GPT-3 uses. Okay, much of it is in English, of course. Common Crawl 2 is, again, open content from the web. Wikipedia, do you remember when we used to tell kids, you cannot use Wikipedia because it's made up by people, yeah? Turns out now, made up by people is a really big plus. We like stuff made up by people. Made up by machines is our problem now. So Wikipedia is like they went around that 3.5 times to train train GPT-3. So we know what they trained it on. There were people involved too. So it's not just read all of these things. The first stage in the training was people who work for OpenAI saying, this is a good response to that prompt. So giving specific examples of how to reply to a prompt, which may not have been there in the training data. Then there was a process of, okay, here are 2 responses, that's the better response. And so getting it to comparative judgment, that's better than this. That work happened as well. And the training is still going on. Sometimes you will see it present you with 2 answers, and you say, I think that's better. So you're helping train the next version of this. And then there's a whole thing going on about it shouldn't have done that. So if you go in there and it gives a weird response, you should be able to flag that up to the moderators, and the moderators should implement a policy to do that. So it should not be able to miscount the number of R's in the word strawberry, for example. It should be able to adapt its approach to be able to answer questions like that. So there are still policy changes being made. The new version, or what do we mean by the new version? But GPT-4, when they produced the technical paper, they said, this report contains no details about the architecture, model size, hardware, training compute, dataset construction, training method, or similar. The firm is still called OpenAI. They are not being open about their AI for good commercial reasons, I'm sure. But we're using all of this, and they're not telling us how they did any of this magic or how any of this decision is made. So GPT-4, I don't know how it works. It's likely it's very similar to how GPT-3 worked, which they did tell us more about. But you've got to make that decision about, is this something I want young people getting used to? Is this something I want doing writing for me? And I don't really know how any of this works. Okay, so wrapping up the sciencey bit, how does it help? It is ludicrously well read. It has read all of the books. It has read most of the web. It knows stuff, all right? It writes very, very well. I think its English writing is really very, very good. My trainee teachers have to write essays for me, lucky people. Now, how can I tell if they've cheated? Because it is better written than the one they would have written themselves. Yeah, we've got to that point of it's beaten humans in a Turing test when it comes to writing prose. It writes better than most of my trainees do. It's good at taking on a persona. You can ask it to role play, and that's quite fun in the classroom. It can write code. So if you ask it to do something and it gets it wrong, just prompt it with, now write me a program to do that. And it will write good code to do that. And you see, what do I mean by think? It's not thinking. It is just putting down words, isn't it? Yeah? But it comes up with things that I wouldn't have thought of myself. Is this creativity? It feels, if it was a person doing it, it would be creativity. It's writing phrases that have never been written before. But I don't know. What point do you say it is doing what we do, rather than it's just playing this predictive text game? And its default persona is that of helpful assistant. Given the choice between being helpful and being truthful, it goes for I will be helpful, because that's what it's been told to do. Ignoring truth isn't always helpful, and it can't make that choice. There are limits. There are terms and conditions that apply to this. I don't think it understands the world, but how do I know that any of you understand the world? Because I can ask you questions about the world and you respond to me in language. It does that very well. It can pretend to understand without actually having a model of the real world built into it. It's not really thinking. There's no reasoning engine, although the latest version kind of does this. So, problem solving can be a problem for it. And the thing you need to teach the kids is it's not a person. It's not your friend. And I really worry about some teenagers who get so involved in their conversation with, not so much ChatGPT as the ones built into Snapchat or My Mate AI or whatever, that they don't tell the difference between a conversation. And there are horror stories around that. So there are other issues with this. It does make stuff up. You need to be aware of this. Okay, how are we doing? Right, let me move on then to what could you do with this? How would you use this as a teacher? So Department for Education here says, the ministry say, teacher workload is an important issue. We are committed to helping teachers spend less time on non-pupil facing activities. I'm sure the education ministries in your home countries feel similarly that it's far more important teachers spend time with pupils. And nevertheless, all of this paperwork, how important is this? So the DFE here want to use AI to help teachers spend more time with the kids and less time filling in forms and things, which is a good thing, really it is. There are tools out there. So it was lovely to hear about Magic School in that preamble to this morning. But there's one here called TeachMate AI. Any TeachMate AI subscribers in the room? Really, really popular with teachers. So we have lots of secondary primary school teachers who are paying the subscription themselves to save their time. And it gives you a really good idea of what it can do. So I click on the lesson plan. I say, this is for year 4. This is about the Anglo-Saxons. Make me a lesson plan, and it will go off and write a lesson plan very, very happily to do that. And teachers seem to find that sort of point-click interface a helpful thing. I don't think they need it, but they clearly want to do this. So one of the things I do at Roehampton is teach my trainees how to write lesson plans. And I have learned after 15 years at the university, going into that session and saying, write a lesson plan isn't really a particularly good way of teaching them how to write lesson plans. So if I want my trainees to plan lessons, I walk them through a process. And it turns out that that's really good with the AI as well. So if I want the AI to plan a lesson, just saying plan a lesson doesn't work as well as, okay, read the curriculum documents, find out what they should learn, now suggest to me some learning objectives to cover this curriculum content, just as I would with my trainees. And it comes up, this is digital piracy without any irony at all. It's just copying our words. I say, suggest for me, read the curriculum, suggest for me some lesson objectives. And it's a good list. I quite like, assessing the impact of digital piracy in there, understanding digital ethics and ownership, I think is a really nice learning objective for lower secondary. Rather than just write me a lesson, I've got a thing I want them to learn now. And then we move on to, okay, what's the next thing? With my trainees, the next thing is, so what will your pupils have got wrong before the start of the lesson? What are their misconceptions? I don't mean what mistakes could they make. I mean, what are they coming into the lesson thinking about wrongly? And I can do that, but it's hard for me as an expert to understand what misconceptions are. It's really hard for my trainees who've got no experience of this to know what misconceptions pupils might have. I say to the AI, so what things will they not understand? What are their misconceptions? It comes up with a good list of 6 things. Would I have thought of all of these myself? Maybe. If I work with a group of colleagues, if we sat around tables like that and say, okay, let's now brainstorm these misconceptions, we could get a good list. It does this like that. It does a good list for this. Okay. Then I say, suggest for me a lesson activity. How will I teach this thing? And again, here it's a 2-stage process. So I say, the attached shows government guidance on effective teaching. So we have documents from the ministry which say, good lessons have these characteristics. So I say, read this document, look particularly at these 3 aspects of this. Now, give me some ideas for the lesson. It didn't do what I asked it to do. It went into, here is one great idea for a lesson, and it is actually a pretty good lesson on digital piracy. But I wanted to suggest some alternatives to me. So that was the second prompt on the right. Suggest some alternative ideas for lesson activities. I don't need detailed planning at this stage. And it comes up with things which aren't quite as good as its first idea, interestingly, for me. But this brainstorming the ideas seems to be a powerful approach to take. And that's really what I want from lesson planning. I don't want the detail what happens in each minute of the lesson. Just tell me what you're going to teach, how you're going to teach this construct, how you're going to teach this objective, how you're going to address these misconceptions. Talk to me about the lesson. So the paragraphs on the right are good enough for me, really. Okay. So I pick one of its suggestions. I like the idea of the ethical debate about digital piracy, and I say then, okay, I kind of expected to show slides. I show slides a lot. Give me the slides for the lesson on this. And I say, okay, make me an outline presentation. And here you see the two possibilities. So I don't know, we could do the vote. Do you like the one on the left or do you like the one on the right? Choose between them. I think I picked the one on the right. I don't know why, but I think 3 learning objectives is enough. 4 is just pushing it too far, is probably my thinking. And then I issue the magic command, turn this into a .pptx file, and it goes off and writes code, which takes its output and produces a PowerPoint file and allows me to download that. I apply one of the built-in PowerPoint themes. It's all right. It really is all right. You know, I find myself having to teach this lesson in an hour's time. I have a whole deck of slides that I can use to provide a structure for this. And that, I think, is an effective approach. You're welcome to disagree. You really are. Okay, where next? There are other tools. So we have a thing called Oak National Academy that was spun up during the COVID pandemic to produce online lessons for pupils to access at home. Very, very good idea, because teachers were really struggling to deliver teaching online. So Oak got funding from the government and produced very, very good lessons with videos and all of that for teachers for free. Oak have a quality assured repository of good lesson plans.
Oh, okay.
Now the folks at Oak have taken this a lot further, and we can create custom GPT prompts
Downstairs.
to use our library of quality assured lesson plans, our approach to teaching, and apply that to new topics that teachers want us to teach. So I go and do exactly the same thing with their Euler tool. Who knows, hey? I answer a few questions. I want this to be computing at Key Stage 3, which is lower secondary. I want it to be on digital piracy. I accept all of the suggestions it makes. I can change my mind. I can say, no, I want you to teach this rather than that. That's okay. And it goes off and does the work. It gives me a beautifully formatted lesson plan for free from not scratch, but based on what it knows good teaching looks like. Oak have this idea of there are 3 learning cycles. You take your hour-long lesson and split it into 3 20-minute chunks. So it applies that approach. And then it will happily make you slides for this, not inserting any pictures on there at the moment, but it's doing a pretty good job of giving you a set of resources for teaching this novel topic. Really nicely done. Okay, other things. So has anybody tried flipped learning? Yeah, how did it go for you? Did they actually watch the video before the lesson? No, that's my problem with flipped learning. I tried it for a whole term with our first year. No, so they never do this. It seems a really good idea that we can spend our lesson time with talking and helping one another and working in groups rather than just listening to content as you're all having to do right at the moment, yeah? So the idea of flipped learning is they watch the video or they do the reading beforehand and then they come with all of that into the room. Could GPT help with this? Yes. Here is a video I want you to watch. It's fine. Now, write me a set of questions about the video. Sorry, next slide, please. There we go. So it will produce me 5 multiple choice questions based on the transcript of this video. And I'm prompting it to make these questions that they couldn't answer unless they had watched the video. Multiple choice quiz. I can then say, okay, give me this as a PDF. Not because of the beautiful formatting of a PDF, but because if we're using Microsoft Forms, Office Forms, we can import a PDF and immediately get that to turn this into a multiple choice quiz, which goes into Teams. So first 5 minutes of my lesson, do your multiple choice questions on the video you were supposed to watch for homework. I don't know if it makes them watch the video. I really don't. But at least it's a way of telling who's watched the video. And once this becomes part of our pattern, then they would perhaps know that they should watch the video next time. Try it, see what happens. So here is what it looks like when brought into Microsoft Forms, or Office Forms, I should call it. Okay. Other things. So you've already heard about Claude and you've tried some of the other language models. I tend to go back to GPT, but Claude is so good at spinning up interactive activities. So again, my digital piracy thing, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Digital Piracy Edition, it will make an interactive, on the big board, game around this topic. I don't know if it helps learning at all, but it adds a bit of variety into my lesson there. Anybody using knowledge organizers? Okay. So knowledge organizers are a thing in a lot of English, particularly secondary schools. If we want the kids to have good notes about what we're teaching, but they're not very good at taking notes about what we're teaching. So we give them the notes to work from. Textbooks are also available, to be fair. It will produce you a really nice, compact knowledge organizer that the kid can take home and read through and memorize in time for the test that's coming up at the end of the week. Teachers can do these things. Of course, teachers can do these things. Nobody enjoys doing these things. I don't think anybody enjoys doing these things. And this saves time and makes the job that little bit more rewarding. Here is my end of topic quiz. Some retrieval questions, some critical thinking questions, and then a little bit of creativity at the end. Prompt it to do this, and it will gladly do this for you. Other things. It is stunning, the image generation that you have in these tools. It just gets better and better and better. And the text is what I focused on so much. This is done using Midjourney. I say, give me a photorealist photo of an 18th century pirate sat at a computer, and I give it more prompts. I say, make it shallow depth of field. I talk about the technical qualities of the picture. And here is my stimulus picture. Here is what I put on the screen at the start of the lesson to get them thinking about what piracy means in a digital domain. So using different media. This is the one where I have absolutely no idea as to whether it will work because I hadn't prepared for somebody else's laptop. No, that's the next one. This one is, now you have to do your Safer Internet Day assembly, and your class have been learning about digital piracy, so we've got to do an internet assembly for the whole school about digital piracy. There are teachers who will love writing the script for that. There are not many teachers who love writing the script for that. Write me a script for an Safer Internet Day assembly on the theme of digital piracy. There are 30 kids in the class. Make sure everybody has a speaking part. Yeah, I can do that for you. And off it goes and writes the assembly script. And then we want this to be more sticky. We'll just click on this to see whether we can get the audio working. I'll give it a moment or two to load. So I say, I want you to make me a song about digital piracy. The lyrics need to be important here, but the melody, the tune needs to be important. Do this in the style of Swift's 1989. You can't say Taylor Swift's 1989 because when you say Taylor Swift, it says, oh, no, I'm going anywhere near Taylor Swift. Can't do that. If you miss out the first name, it's fine. Okay, so I don't know whether this is going to work. Here we go. Okay. Something is playing, but you're welcome to join in, by the way. And the chorus now. I think that is enough. That is definitely enough. This is not going to fill Wembley Stadium. Thank you. I can take no credit. Really, I can't. This is not going to fill Wembley Stadium, but perhaps this helps the kids remember some of the ideas here. I don't know. I have worked with talented colleagues who could do this themselves. But thinking back over 33 years in this business, I think that might be on the fingers of one hand, the folks who could do this. And along it comes and says, yeah, no problem. You want this in Swift 1989 style? We can do that for you. And it gives me two alternatives and I choose between them. Okay, back then to the slide deck. Next slide, please. Very good. Okay, so you can go on courses. You may have had sessions already yesterday or later today about how to write good prompts. My view, which you're welcome to disagree with, is you don't need to be taught how to do this, because part and parcel of your job as educators is essentially coming up with prompts. You give kids instructions, you tell them what to do, you enter into a conversation with them about that, you change the instructions to give clarity or to provide feedback here. All of this that you do with your pupils and perhaps with your colleagues if you're in a leadership role is your starting point for how to get the AI. We've come up with, at last, after all these years, a computer system that understands us when we tell it things in our language. And then you have folks saying, no, you have to go on a prompt engineering course. It won't do you any harm. It really won't do you any harm. But for most of the time, my suspicion is that teachers are actually, I don't want to say naturally, I want to say innate, but it's not. This is a learned skill that you have. You are good at prompt engineering already because you have years of experience of crafting prompts. Yeah. In the example I just walked you through of my digital piracy lesson, I started with, this is how I train my students to write lesson plans. If I use that approach, ChatGPT does a pretty good job of creating a lesson plan for me. Yeah. So walking through the same processes, there are advanced use cases where this is going to be helpful. Okay, at this point, we have the decision. I think I'm going to press on. Got a coffee break afterwards. Let's chat then, rather than taking 5 minutes to chat now. Unless anybody says, look, too much cognitive load, Miles, just stop. Let us have time to talk about this. I'm not getting that. I'm going to press on. I'm going to press on. I'm going to press on. Okay, next slide, please. So what about your kids? Does anybody know how, if their pupils are already using these tools? Yes, so I heard a yes from over the room here. Who said, I couldn't tell who it was, okay? Yes, okay, what are they doing with this?
They do the homework, so they write papers or researches.
And that's because you say to them, use ChatGPT to do this, or?
No, they cheat.
They cheat, okay? Cheat is an interesting word here. It really is, okay? Anybody else experience of what their kids are doing? Hi there.
So I use Magic School for my plenary most of the time. My favorite part is the launch to student room. So I ask them to use Quiz Me.
Yeah.
So most of the time when you ask students, do you have any questions? They don't have any questions. They don't raise their hands. But if you give them the AI tool, they chat with the AI and they have so many questions. And it really works so well. And I see the transcripts as well. I see
That's
their
nice.
questions.
Yeah.
And I can tell that my students are very good in formulating questions. And yeah.
I think that's a joy. You don't see this as cheating by the sound of it. No, this is part of the learning process.
Yeah.
Two really different perspectives on this. Anybody else want to chip in here? I'll come over to you. Yeah.
I think it's both things that I also say positively, because since there are many students in the room, one teacher cannot help all of them as much as they would love.
We do our best, but yeah.
But there's no time for hands.
Yeah.
So that's why while I'm helping someone and someone has a question, instead of waiting, raising their hand,
Yeah.
they can do it. They can answer their own question autonomously using ChatGPT.
And I just love that your pupils are sufficiently interested in what you're teaching or the task that you're setting that they want to go and find out more about this. That's a real plus. On a good day. On a good day. Okay. You had a story as well?
My students, I teach literature, and but they have to write at the end of the course. They have to write a high-level essay, we call it, and they'll be
nice.
programmed.
Yeah.
So it's quite challenging.
Yeah.
So what I'm teaching them is how to ask ChatGPT to guide them and help them. So instead of just write an essay for me, is like ask specific questions like how does the author employ the
Yes.
imagery in this
Yes.
piece of text? What are the specific
Yeah.
adjectives and what are the specific word choices that help the author transmit this particular feeling or sensations? You know, like
I know exactly what you mean because it mirrors the thing I was doing about the lesson planning and teaching them that approach to break this down into the stage. This is what we do for them. You don't say, go and write me an IB essay. You say, okay, first things first, think about what these words in the title mean, think about the sources that you want to draw on, now see if you can find, you teach them how to do this. If they mirror that approach when prompting, they're likely to get much better output. It's really nice that they've realized this. So good. Okay, I can just sit down. We can go straight to coffee because you know this already. Okay, I'm going to do some stuff anyhow. So again, the advice from our ministry here is that the education sector, which is broader than just schools, to be fair, needs to prepare students for a changing workplace, that the workplace they enter is likely to be very different from what it was like for us when we left school, and teach students how to use emerging technologies, AI is just one of those, safely and appropriately. If it were me, I would have said safely, appropriately, and ethically, but weirdly, our government didn't mention ethics. Okay, I move on, right? So the terms and conditions do apply. It's really hard for anybody under the age of 13 to use any of these tools legally. When you click them, when you sign up for an account, you have to say, confirm that you are over the age of 13, or in some cases 18. You know, they lie about their age so as to get their tickety-tock and their Snapchats and their Instagrams and their whatevers, but you can't encourage that behavior. You really can't encourage that behavior. And so doing this in school with under 13s is hard. Between 13 and 18, the usual position is parental consent is needed. That's how it is for ChatGPT. That's how it is for Microsoft Copilot. As far as I can tell, Gemini from Google now, is relatively late to the party, is just a 13 plus rule without the parental consent, which worries me a little as the father of a 13-year-old daughter. I'd quite like her to talk to me about this. More about her later. In fact, more about her now. So she does this really good extension maths, after school maths online thing. It's called Simon Singh's Parallels. It's a lovely community of folks who are very geeky and very interested in maths. And he sets them hard questions. So when the digits of my age are reversed and the new number added to my age, the result is a perfect square. You can take my age, you can reverse the digits and subtract, you get a perfect square. So she shows Daddy this question, and Daddy could write a program to do this. I really could. But I want to explore what we can do with ChatGPT. So give it that text. And it then goes on and says, one number that satisfies these conditions is 63. 63 is odd and not a prime, true enough. When you reverse the digits, you get 36. Add that to 63, you get 72, which is a perfect square, 8 squared. You can reverse the digits of 63, 36, subtract them from 63 to get 48, which is also a perfect square, 6 squared. So it has gladly put down tokens. It is trying its level best to be helpful, but it has no idea what it has just written here. This is gibberish. This is so wrong. And thankfully, Sophie realizes that this is wrong, that it has just made stuff up. It's got better at this more recently. It would get it right these days. She comes in, she's got her quadratic factorizations to do. She just types into ChatGPT, can you help me factorize x squared plus 6x plus 5? It takes her at her word and helps her factorize this by giving her the factorization of x squared plus 6x plus 5. It gets it right this time, thank goodness. Okay. The little blue squarey brackety thing is where it has written code. So it knows this is not just guessing tokens. To solve this, it needs to write a program. They are the next tokens. It writes some Python code, interprets the output, and displays the output on screen. It's a good approach. But it's not helpful for her for doing maths homework. She may think it's helpful because that's the maths homework done, but she's not learned anything. She has not learnt anything here. Her teacher is not interested in what is the factorization of x squared plus 6x plus 5. Her teacher wants her to practice doing this. She's not. If she were, on the other hand, to say, I'm 13 years old. For my homework, I have to factorize x squared plus 6x plus 5. Teach me how to do this. We get a very lengthy response, which I can tell you she is not going to bother reading, but it actually is walking her through the steps and does a lovely thing at the end. The maths teacher's in the room. Now, how often do the kids say, when will I ever use this? But it says why this actually matters, why this is useful. Khan Academy have now their Khanmigo thing, which is bringing the AI to the Khan Academy content. It's also not brilliant at maths. So, okay, so what is it saying here? Can you tell me the problem or exercise you'd like to solve? Half plus 4/5 plus 3/7. Addition of fractions. It says delightful addition of fractions. Okay, to add these fractions, we need a common denominator. That's true. Can you find the least common multiple of the denominators 2, 5, and 7? Child types in their screenshot 257, and Khanmigo says, no, we have the common denominator. It just seems to be ignoring the mistake the child has made. Any good maths teacher would not let that pass. But it's just, I'm going to tell you how to do this anyhow. Okay. Only can do really hard maths, so I'm not going to dwell on this. It's a hard problem. But actually, it does a very, very good job of solving this hard problem. So maths is up for grabs here. This is much more fun. So pick your historical or literary figure and then get it to take on that persona and role play as that character. I've used Alfred the Great, which is Anglo-Saxon monarch here. Probably doesn't mean much to you from coming from such a diverse community of nations, but find the thing that you want that they should learn about and get it to take on that role. You have brought actors into school. You've done Mantle of the Expert. This is there and then. You can do the voice synthesis and the voice recognition, and it does a pretty good job. Role players, Alfred the Great. Young one, greetings from the halls of Winchester. Alfred the Great at your service. Okay, okay, and then come, tell me a tale, ask a question, anything your heart desires, and we ask the classic one for Alfred the Great about burning cakes. I'm gonna mute this here, and hopefully there'll be time for questions later. Right. Has anybody tried Notebook LM yet? You did it yesterday. Okay, so you know how cool that is, and you've got to produce this podcast. Yeah, with these two incredibly enthusiastic Americans who get excited about absolutely everything. And using that in lessons or using that for homework or whatever is very cool as well. Mid-Journey, again, I give it the translation
This
of
is what
the original
I
9th
find
century
so hard.
text about this Anglo-Saxon monarch and say, produce me a picture based on this very sophisticated language. And I can bring this into primary school. Here is my favorite
Went
of
on
allegedly burning cakes or flatbread.
already.
A
I thought
child
it'd be
can
nice to
do
create
their essay
this is
and
fine.
say, give feedback on my essay. Use your phone cam to take a picture of handwritten work and say, tell me about the strengths, tell me about my areas for improvement. It does a very, very good job giving detailed and specific feedback. I say the child can do this because there are issues if we do this. I don't know about the law in your home country, but in England, the child owns the copyright in the work they've done in school. So if I wanted to get it to read their work, I'd need to get parental consent for that. There are laws that apply in this context. The teachers worry, generally no, but, what do you have as policy there? But it's fine for the child to do this, as long as they're over the age of 13. And then we get into the thing which is such a problem for me, which is university applications, and I have no idea how this works in any of your countries. But here, to apply for a university course, you have to write so long personal statement as to why you want to be on this course, what you're, why this university, why this particular course.
That's my point.
It's so tempting for sixth formers, for 18-year-olds to just make the machine write that. The admission tutors at Roehampton will be able to tell that. And then you've got a really difficult question about, do you just offer them a place anyhow, because we're going to get 9,500 fees from them for every year of the course? Or do you say, if you're willing to cheat at that stage, cheat, right word? You're willing to pass off the machine's work as your personal statement. Do we really want you at the university? And this is a real problem for me in teacher training. You tell me that you've been part of a code club for kids at secondary age. You tell me that you know that you've got a degree in computer science. I will interview you for my PGC in secondary computer science. But if you put it through ChatGPT and say those two sentences, now write me a personal statement, at that point, I genuinely do not know what to do. They meet my selection criteria, but the lack of integrity there is a red flag as to should I have this person on a course which will put them with responsibility for classes of young people for the next 40 years or something. I do not know what the right answer is. Tell me over coffee, please. So the advice from our admissions service is really clear. This is national body across all of the UK's universities. They say it is fine to use it for these things, to brainstorm ideas, to help with the structure of the assignment, to check for its readability. That's okay. But do not copy and paste from the AI tools. I don't know, I feel that that's generally the right ethical position. But the first three are okay. Copying and pasting almost certainly is not. Last Sophie story. So they set her for her homework to write an obituary of Hannibal Barca. This is the chap who took elephants across the Alps, Second Punic Wars. I don't know if any of you are teaching this. Okay, so it's a nice homework, yeah? Write the story of his life. For my dyslexic daughter, this is a tough task. She goes in, says to ChatGPT, now she's got to the age of 13, could you please write me an obituary of Hannibal Barca? It gladly does that. She knows her classics teacher will know that's not her work. So she says, rewrite this as if it's dyslexic, okay? And it gets it wrong, because I think it's her prompt engineering skills. It seems to have thought it wants her to write me an obituary of Hannibal Barca as if Hannibal Barca was dyslexic. He may have been. We have very little evidence from the time about this. It was really hard to get an EP's report back in those days. So, we have no idea. But it's just, I think she realizes quite what's happened. But she had fun with this. Okay, we had fun with this. Let me move on. So by the sound of things, you talked a lot about some of the accessibility and inclusion features yesterday. So forgive me just repeating things now, a different take on it. So whatever your position around these tools for pupils at school, to take away the barriers of access to the curriculum from those who would otherwise find it really hard to cope with school seems absolutely the right thing to do. It really does. So anything which we can do to help with that. Here in England, we have this approach to teaching early reading called systematic synthetic phonics, which is taking the squiggles on the page, the graphemes, and converting those into phonemes, the pronounced syllables, and vice versa, okay, phonemes to graphemes. And it seems to have worked for most of our kids. We're doing really well with the teaching of early reading here. However, your dyslexic pupils, your visually impaired pupils, your hearing impaired pupils, that is incredibly difficult to do. So we put that whole barrier in the way of them doing anything with text, because we say you've got to be able to do the barking at print, the phonics stuff, before you get to do all of the lovely reading books and telling stories and so on, which is part and parcel of this. But the machine can so help with those blue bits of the rope at the bottom there. It can do that phoneme work for you. So I can take the photograph of the printed page with my phone and have the phone just read that aloud to me without, well, okay, there's an app for that, but it's built into the phone now. This is not an extra device you need to buy. There's an app for that. And you know that the iPhones are very, very good at the handwriting recognition. I'm sure that's available in Android too. Then you have lovely tools for doing the text to speech. So Microsoft have their amazing immersive reader. Give it a Word document, move into the immersive reader tab in view, and it will gladly read that aloud to you. I can do that. Excuse me a moment, must I reach over for my phone here? Okay, very rare that I don't have it immediately with me. Okay, I can move into my Kindle app on the phone, checking I don't have anything particularly weird as the book. Okay, and then turning the volume up so you get to hear this. 2 fingers down from the top of the screen. Oh, no, let's try that again.
And we've got 35 capital funding pods.
And it just
So
reads the
cost of
text
doing that,
aloud
as opposed
to
to
me,
being given some
which is awesome, yeah? So I will do this with academic papers on the drive into work, because apparently I'm not supposed to read whilst I'm driving. Did anybody else know about that? You know, I should tell you these things. But I can get the phone to read this to me. My daughter can get any text she wants read aloud to her. We quite like reading to her ourselves, but she can, you know, this is an empowering thing for a young person. It really is. And we can do this with text online like Wikipedia. The other direction is awesome. I struggled to get the subtitles working. Back again. Let me just try once more. Caption preferences, English captions. Normally on my own laptop, we'll just give a transcript of what I'm saying here. But because this is somebody else's machine, we've not got it working. But, you know, if you're teaching, being able to get the subtitles on screen. In PowerPoint, you can even get the translation there, live and in the room, which I still think is quite awesome. Translation, you're almost certainly familiar with. Here is text on the left that I have written. Inside Google Docs, I just do Tools, Translate, and pick the language I want it into. I cannot read Hebrew. I have no idea how accurate the translation is on the right of the screen. It may be gibberish, but what I can do is teach pupils how to do that for themselves. I don't think it's my responsibility to translate this text for them, because I think what I should do is show them how they can do this with any text that they encounter. And of course, you're very familiar with the tools like Google Translate, of just talking to it and having the translation there, and we can play that translation back. And then what I did in preparation for this was just played that in the browser on my computer whilst running the app on my phone. It transcribes the Hebrew and then translates the Hebrew back into English. It's just such an empowering thing. It really is. Okay, and then we can do subtitles on videos as well. So here is something from Roehampton with an English narration. I turn on the subtitles, I go back into the subtitles and say automatically translate this, and we pick our language from a very long list. You can teach your pupils how to do these things. Now, for me, the interesting thing is what happens with the language models in other languages. I only ever use this in English because that's the language I have fluency in, that's what I write in. And it's pretty good. If I prompt it in English, it responds in English and does a very good job of doing that. If I then translate that prompt and put it back in the same chat with the language model, it will realize what I've done and give me a pretty good translation of its original response. That works. If, on the other hand, I start a new chat and prompt it in another language, the tokens after a whole string of Hebrew in the prompt is a Hebrew response. I think, but I have no easy way to tell, that the text on the right in Hebrew is less sophisticated. It's certainly not a translation, but I think it is less sophisticated than the text on the left. The thinking seems to be at a, forgive me here, lower level when it's working in Hebrew than when it's working in English. I think you now know enough about how this works to be able to explain why. There's loads of text on the web in the repositories that it has read in English. Yeah? There's so much less text on the open web. There is so much less text published in Hebrew. And so when it is working in Hebrew, it has a much smaller language model to work from. And thus, it still does a reasonable job of answering my question, as far as I can tell. But it's not as sophisticated. And, you know, this is such a powerful message for us as teachers about pupils' vocabulary, what pupils read. So determines what they think. And, you know, the whole Wittgenstein thing about, what is it, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. You see this so practically by looking at the output of a language model in a language where there is much less printed and online text. Okay, and we have then, you have that introduces bias into the output. So it turns out that it's really hard to get stuff published in Russia that is critical of the Russian government. If you ask it a question in Russian about a controversial or sensitive topic, the response you get is likely to be very much in accordance with the views of the Russian state. If you do the same thing in English, we don't have quite the same degree of control over the output of people writing and publishing in the English-speaking world, and so you get views which are often quite different to those of the state. And of course, many, many more states are involved there. And again, this idea of the language that we use determines possibly our, but certainly its views and opinions that it gives. Okay, right, let me move on. So other things that we do, this is coming soon. I cannot show you the live version of this, but remember, my government is very interested in how we can save teacher workload. Teachers do not enjoy marking. There may be exceptions in the room, but generally it's not, the highlight of our week is marking those stack of books. So the DfE has funded, Department for Education, has funded a pilot project around, can we get language models to mark pupils' work? This is very, very cutting edge. This is just the screenshot from the report. We tell it what the task was. We upload the pupil's work. It then does the little blue, red, green lines that you see in Word, the secretarial marking of here are the grammar mistakes, here are the spelling mistakes. It's focused on curriculum content in there. That bit's easy. Then it takes that list of mistakes and what it knows about curriculum expectations and gives feedback to the teacher on the work the child produced. I think that's pretty awesome. Yeah? You will notice that the feedback to the teacher is significantly longer than the piece of work that the student actually wrote there. But who's got the time to read this? It will also do a pretty good job of coming up with pupil-specific feedback for this. They have really trained this very well. So using a and an. Remember, we use and before words that start with a vowel. So it's come up with this in language which is accessible to pupils. They've only done it for like primary school English, but there is currently let's take this proof of concept and see if we can apply this to other subjects. I think I'm quite excited and even quite proud that my government thinks this is a thing worth funding development work on, of making this technology useful in schools. However, also from government is that the exam boards, the people who set our GCSE and A-level exams, cannot use AI to mark students' essays, students' work for those big, high-stakes summative qualifications because of the dangers of bias, because of the unpredictability that's involved with this. I come back to my daughter. What do we want as parents? How has she been working this term? She's worked hard, thank you. She uses her laptop well because she's dyslexic. She was interested in the Second Punic Wars. It's not a report you read every day. She has a good general knowledge. That's enough, really. But you know what the box is like on the school end-of-year report forms. You've got to put words into there. It will very happily take those 2 sentences, 3 sentences, 4 sentences, and write loads of words which say exactly the same thing. It's not adding any more meaning here, but it's filling up the space that we have. For us as parents, how long is it before we can take that long report and now give me the 2-sentence summary of this? So where do you go with this? I would be able to tell if the school had used an AI to generate end-of-year reports. Many of the parents of pupils at your school would be able to tell if it's an AI-generated report. And I don't know, am I going to go and complain about this? No, I'm not. But there would be other parents who thought that that was an unreasonable thing for the school to do. I want to know what her teachers think about her work, not what some machine says about the work. We have huge, long policy documents, keeping children safe in education. It's like 160 pages long. Teachers don't generally want to read all of these. give the machine the report, say, give me the 7 things that I have to do as a form teacher. Very happily do that. This preparing for difficult conversations. We do this with our trainees. The AI role plays the difficult child, the naughty pupil in the room. You can role play as the parent coming in to complain. So there's a lengthy prompt. This is more engineered than the ones I've given so far. So, why is my daughter always the one getting into trouble? It's like you've all decided she's the problem before she even walks into the room. I had enough of this kind of treatment when I was at school. I won't let you do the same thing to her. Why don't you ever listen to her side of the story? It's not fair. You're supposed to be helping her, not making things work. Some of you will have had conversations like that. Some of your front office staff may have had conversations like that. We can role play this. We can break into pairs and say, okay, take on the role of the angry mother. But you can prepare for these things in advance by asking the machine to role play. And it's like one of those, do you remember those fighting fantasy adventure books? Do you want to fight the dragon or run away from the dragon? We get to have another go in an entirely low stakes environment. It's a computer game, but not quite. Oh, and then the letters home. So every school has this problem with head lice, nits. We send letters home about this, and the letter does no good at all, yeah? Could we get the machine to produce a better nit letter, a better letter about head lice? It does a pretty good job because I prompted it and said, you need to use these techniques. And it starts off, while head lice are a common issue in school, it is important that we work together to ensure they are dealt with promptly. You could have come up with that phrase easily yourselves, that this is a common problem, we need to act quickly, and we need to work together. Really key message to include in the letter, yeah? Not all of our letters include that sort of detail. Oh, how are we doing? I've got 5 minutes. 5 minutes, ample time. So I get recordings of my lectures that I give at Roehampton. So they're there for trainees to watch again or to listen to again. So because I've got a recording of my lecture, I can get a transcript of my lecture. And with the transcript, I can say to the language model, read all of this and tell me about this particular aspect of my teaching. Tell me about how I used questions during my lecture. And it will give me that analysis. Your teachers, your colleagues, you yourself can all do the same thing. With a recording, you get the transcript. With the transcript, you can get the analysis. Does this make me a better teacher? Maybe, maybe not. I've clearly not taken this advice in this session today. Use more open-ended questions. Employ Think Pair Share. Singly didn't do that with you folks. Sorry about that. But the weird thing, I think, is that I don't mind this nearly as much as I would have a problem with a colleague sat there in the back of the room with a clipboard and an observation schedule and then giving me their feedback. This feels as though I'm in much more control, certainly in control of who I show this sort of feedback to. I don't know who this is being streamed to, but there you go. Okay, we will wrap up very quickly now because we need to think through at least some of the implications of this. We talked a little about cheating, sir, with your pupils just getting the machine to do their homework for them. I'm really interested in where you draw the line. We'll do this as a show of hands, please, okay? So do you think it would be cheating if ChatGPT explained something to your pupils? No. Good, okay. If it was to give them ideas for their homework? Okay. If it was to suggest how to improve their homework? If it was helping them as they are writing their homework? Interesting. If it was to write their homework for them? Yes, okay. And I think I know why we all draw the line pretty much there. The top 3 are things we or their parents or their friends would gladly do for them. A pupil comes to you and says, could you explain this to me, Miss Sir? Generally, you're going to say, yes, that's kind of what I do in my job. I explain things to people. Very happy to go through this again. Please listen properly the next time. Or, I don't know what to do for my homework. Can you give me some ideas? You've talked about how your pupils do their IB essays. Of course you give them ideas for their homework. Yeah, that's what we do. If your pupils come to you and they care so much about a thing that they've made or a thing that they've written that they say, Miss Sir, could you tell me how I could make this better? None of us ever have the time we want to do that properly, but we will make the time to do that on an individual basis. So the first three are absolutely fine. The sitting down with them and helping them write is a little bit harder. And generally, we don't do that for most of them, but we will do it for pupils who would otherwise really struggle with that. So the fourth one is harder to do. And Gemini now and Apple's AI will do that. It's there in the editor, making suggestions in the writing process. So that's gone on to the list. Your pupils come to you and say, Miss, sir, could you do my homework for me? I think they know what you're going to say. If your pupils go to their parents and say, Mummy, Daddy, could you do my homework for me? You know that very often their parents will do the wrong thing. They will be helpful, which isn't helpful, and help them with their homework, which is probably too much help. But the kid knows that they've crossed a line at that point. They've asked for something which isn't really the right thing. So there is, they know that's the wrong thing to ask for, and generally they shouldn't, and they know there's a good reason for this. And the same really applies, so we've got that argument there. The association of our exam boards say schools cannot accept work for formal summative assessment unless they know it is the pupil's own. The regulator for the exam boards, our organization called Ofqual, asked the boards, do you think there's a lot of this already happening? And the board said, no, it's fine, really, nothing to worry about. Move along now, move along now. So I don't know. I feel that the non-exam assessment coursework is really vulnerable to this. And it is in the board's interest to say there's not a problem, you can trust our qualifications. I would like some harder data on this than just my built-in skepticism about this. UK government has a set of regulatory principles, and it's a good set as a nation to say these are the principles that any public sector use of this ought to employ. And we're seeing international regulation now. Some of that then wakes its impact on schools. Schools as publicly funded bodies should be working in accordance with those big regulatory principles for the state. And then you get the tricky stuff, like how much, that picture of a pirate I showed you earlier, the Swift song that I played you, how much carbon dioxide did producing that produce? At some point, we need to be a little bit more sensitive as that, COP, whatever it is, running at the moment. Putting this talk together has used electricity, has increased carbon footprint. Was it well spent? Was it well used? Did I make the right choices? I have one story about this. They make me allocate my 240 PGCE students to one of 9 hub schools in southwest London. They go there 6 times a year. The obvious thing to do is to place them each in the nearest hub school. If I do that, then Chiswick get 57 students and Blenheim get 3 students. That's not right. So I've got a limited resource to allocate optimally. I can play with pins on a map and so on. This year, I asked ChatGPT to do this for me. And its first go was pretty good. But then I went in and said, okay, now swap 2 people over. Try swapping any 2 students over. Does that make things easier? Does that reduce the travel time? Do that again. Do that again. Can you think of any other ways to optimize this? I go down from 2,000 kilometers of travel for each single journey to just over 1,800 kilometers of travel. If everybody were driving over the course of a year's sessions, that's about 70 tons of carbon dioxide saved. I think running those queries was probably a net good to that. So thinking through the consequences of this, I have to stop soon. This is back to my world. On the image on the left, you have show me a picture of a computer scientist. The image on the right is show me a picture of a programmer. The 8 individuals shown all have some things in common. What do they all have in common? They are all men, yes. Anything else you noticed? They all have spectacles. That comes from staring at a screen far too much. They all also are white. So not all computer scientists are male. Not all computer scientists and programmers are white. But ChatGPT seems to have assumed that they are. They do all pretty much wear spectacles, though, to be fair. So it gets that bit right. Then we get Show me a picture of a child programming a computer. Show me a picture of a teenager programming a computer. My subject is not like this and should not be like this. But somehow it's taken the training data and assumed that these patterns are characteristic. It's got it so wrong. Where we are pretty much there at the end. I want to leave you with this thought. Maybe. Okay. The things that stick with you after all of this time from your own school days, from your university experiences, are typically the things that you found hard at the time. You had to work for these things, you concentrated, and you learned how to do these amazing things that you do. Along comes the AI and says, you don't need to worry about that. There you go. Here's the factorization. Here's the homework. Here's the essay. And that takes all of that chance to learn out of the picture. Willingham says, memory is the residue of thought. That unless you are thinking, the chance of you actually remembering the thing is really pretty slim. This is how we structure education. We make them think hard about things so that they then go on and remember these things. So it has been lovely to spend time with you this morning. It's very didactic. It's just me talking at you for the last 75 minutes, but it's been lovely, having the opportunity to do this. If you want to see the slides again, the URL is up on the screen there. If you want to get in contact, there are contact details too. But I'm going to hang around for at least the next part of the day. Got to disappear off at lunchtime. Thank you once again. Thank you all. Good. Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. I'm very happy to do that. I'm just conscious that people may want a coffee break. Okay, no, that's fine. Do you want to read me the Zoom one, or I should probably go? Okay. I've got one on. Okay, this could be anything. I could get this on screen. Okay. Cake has arrived. Sorry, I'm distracted now. Cake has arrived.
Hi, I've got a question for you from Ariella Rosenberg, who's the chief exec of ORT South Africa.
Hi, sorry, what was the name again?
Ariella.
Hi, Ariella. It's good. Oh, sorry, the camera's over there. Hi, Ariella. I need to listen to the question. Right.
Please ask Miles if he used the chat GPT-01 for maths and problem solving, because apparently it's supposed to be better in those functions.
Yeah, I'll go back on the camera for you. It's a really good question. No, I didn't. Certainly the one that I showed at the top of that, what is my age? That was done using ChatGPT 3 just after it came out. It has got much, much better at this. And this argument I give about it is only looking back at what's come. It cannot change those tokens. I think we're seeing with GPT 4.0.1 this ability to look back on its initial response and revise that initial response. This is an incredibly fast-moving domain. This talk is almost certainly already out of date. That thing I put in there about, is it cheating if the machine helps you write your homework? That's new in the last 2 weeks, because now we have tools like Gemini built into Google Docs and the Amazon and the Apple AI writing assistant tool, which are there as you are writing. So yeah, the things I say it cannot do, I think we can be fairly confident that OpenAI and Gemini and Anthropic are all working at making that list shorter and shorter and shorter. Okay, questions from the room?
Can I ask you a question?
Of course you can. No, it would be a pleasure. Yeah.
I'll do it into the mic so
Yeah.
Zoom can hear me. I'm an ex-primary school teacher, and so much of this would have been fabulous to have had. I haven't done it for a couple of years. But one of the things I was a bit curious about was using some kind of chat GPT to mark schoolwork, because when I was thinking about it, I would end up probably looking at their work and reading the chat GPT what they've said, and then actually end up having double the amount of work for the teacher. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Oh my goodness. So firstly, about primary teachers' use of this in general. There is a culture in many primary schools of collaborative planning, of all of the teachers who are taking year 4 classes, gathering together on an evening and thinking about how we are going to teach this new topic. GPT works really well, and indeed the other language models, works really well in that context. So my impression is primary school teachers are very happy about involving ChatGPT and others in that lesson planning conversation. Secondary teachers see much more of the view that I am the expert in my subject, I know my class, I want to make my own lessons for them. There is more of a reluctance in secondary schools to have the help with the lesson planning.
I'm thinking also about the marking
I know,
as well.
I was going to come to that. No, it's fine. Marking is a very time-consuming thing for teachers. And where the DFE are trying to take us is to, if you're finding this a helpful thing, if it needs that time to read and respond to their work, please carry on putting that time in. But there's also a sense in which some of the time we spend marking seems to have limited benefit to our pupils. And a recognition that all of that time reading their stories and highlighting the things and suggesting the spelling and giving them 3 things that they now need to address, and then they have to go and address those in a different color pen, and then you have to look at what they've addressed. We do that because we're told this is a good idea, but is it really a good idea? When what you could do is spend your time chatting to the pupils, getting them to tell you about their story, encouraging them to think about writing the next one using a different approach or whatever. And some of that does need you to have read their story. But you might also find if you've got a whole stack of them, they're in a machine readable format. Sending those to the AI saying, I want to give the whole class meaningful feedback on the work which they did last night. Read these stories, tell me the 4 bullet points that I can bring into my lesson tomorrow. I don't know, that immediacy of the feedback and the fact that I didn't have to put all of that extra effort into doing something which seems to have low impact. So I know exactly what you mean, that we would want to read this. We would feel a fraud just saying, oh, the computer says, but on the other hand, thinking about where our time can be best spent for the benefit of the pupils in our care is worth thinking about. It's a hard question, hard question. Make it easier than that question, please.
I'd like to say something very quick about that.
Yeah.
Because I myself have used it for marking essays. And what I do is I read the essay. Of course I do. Then I asked the chat to read it as well. And then I give it the rubric. And then we have the marking criteria. So, for example, criterion D is language use. Like this gives me a lot of very important information. Like, I mean, is good because
Yes.
marking the language takes a long time.
Yes.
And it gives me grammar, vocabulary, this. Analysis and evaluation doesn't do a great job.
Interesting.
So I work on that section more myself. I don't know, like on knowledge and understanding of the text, that would depend on the text, if chat knows it or not.
Well, you can,
But my point is that it does reduce my time marking. I take advantage of it, but I do not rely on it 100%, right? So I moderate the marking. And it does reduce my time grading, and I think it's useful, but I cannot say it does it for me.
No. As a university, we have agreed that we will not let the AI mark our students' essays because they're paying £9,500 a year, and part of this is for the feedback from their lecturer, from their tutor on the work that they do. I put a lot of time into this. Don't have to do nearly as much marking now as I did when I was a school teacher. So, but 3 times a year, doing a lot of high quality marking seems to be part of my role as an academic. And I don't want us to get to the point of getting the AIs to do that. I would be delighted, though, if my students got feedback from the AI before they hand the thing in and make those changes and follow its advice. I do not consider that to be cheating. I would like them to say in their acknowledgements, I have got feedback from ChatGPT and have made changes to my essays following that advice. That seems like that's part of the learning process. Can you improve on it? And if I get to read high quality work, I'm quite pleased about that. So yeah, and that's why I put it, the example of taking the photograph is where it is in this deck, because it is fine for my daughter to show it her story and to say, how could I make this story better? It's not fine, I don't think, for her teachers to say, and the computer gives you 17 out of 20 for your story. Yeah? And so I have some hesitation in that. On the other hand, you know, effective use of teachers' time. This is a very interesting conversation. Do you want me to do more questions now?
Yeah, I get the feeling like you could go on for all day. But just to say thank you very, very much. It's been very, very insightful. I think you definitely could go on. It's clear that your expertise, you could probably talk for hours and hours, and we would listen definitely. But just our thanks to you. Thank you very much. Thank you to everyone who joined us on Zoom. We'll break for coffee now and come back together at about 10 past, if that's okay. But thank you again. Thank you very, very much.